Hello everyone, and welcome back to the History of Humankind. In the last episode, we discussed the pottery, small sculptures, instruments, and stone slabs of the pre-dynastic and early dynastic periods of Mesopotamia. In today's episode, I want to look at the large-scale, monumental innovations of the Sumerians in the forms of architecture and engineering. Many people associate monumental structures with the Egyptians thanks to their great pyramids at Giza. But Mesopotamia was really the origin of large-scale stone structures, and the first city of Uruk in Sumer had a population of around 50,000 by 2800 BCE. So they were really the originators of urban planning. Okay. But to truly understand who the first architects and engineers of the world were, we have to go farther back into the Neolithic period. So on the left here we have a site known as Gobekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey. And it was created around 9500 BCE. And this is really a remarkable site because it predates the domestication of plants and animals. For a long time, scholars believe that the Neolithic revolution started because man settled down after he had discovered agriculture, but this site really overthrows that theory. So there are a bunch of T-shaped megaliths in a circular site, and they were used probably for ritualistic ceremonies. The kind of concentrated labor required to build such a structure means that hunter-gatherers were settling down for the first time for ritualistic purposes. On the right, we have the site known as Koyuk, also from modern-day Turkey, and this really was founded around 7500 BCE. So at this point, man starts to use mud brick, and also he has domesticated plants and animals. So inside these mud brick houses, there are images of men kind of coaxing animals into pens, and there are bull's horns that decorate the interior. As I said before, they are made of mud brick, and these structures were kind of slammed together in no real order, and there's no central temple, central worshiping place. So it seems that rituals and worship was a really egalitarian, popular activity, and not yet belonging to a specific priestly class. And there were other monumental stone structures during the Neolithic period, most notably the stone town wall at Jericho and the megaliths such as the Karnak stones in France. But for the purposes of our lecture on Mesopotamia, let's fast forward to the Umayyad period, which you'll see up here. Lasted from around 5900 BCE to 4300 BCE. And this is really part of that pre-dynastic Mesopotamian period we talked about in the last episode. And it predates the Uruk period before the flood. So the center of Umayyad culture was the city known as Eridu, down here, very close to Ur and Uruk, which you are already familiar with. And it was probably established around 5400 BCE. According to myths, it was home to the god Enki, who lived at the Abzu Temple, known as the House of the Aquifer. And it is said that the goddess Inanna, who comes from Uruk, visited Enki in Eridu to receive the gift of civilization. Okay, and if you remember correctly, Uruk is considered the first city from 3200 BCE. Eridu is mentioned in the Sumerian kings list as the hometown of Alulim, the first king who ruled about 28,800 years before the flood. But Eridu is really significant because of its location here. The Persian Gulf at that time flooded much farther in. And so it was right on the water here, and it was the meeting point of three different kinds of people. So you had from the north, possibly from areas like Koyuk that first started domesticating plants and animals. You have these peasant farmers bringing their grains. You also, from the west in the Levant, you have the Semitic-speaking tent dwellers, the herders like Abraham a few thousand years later. And then along the Arabic littoral, this shoreline here, you have fishermen living in the reed huts. So it is a meeting point of three different people because it's a strategic point on this waterway. And it's at Eridu that you see really the beginnings of social stratification and the rise of hereditary chieftains and priests. So the early temples at Eridu were not the ziggurats that you imagine. Those don't come around until later, around 2200 BCE. They were just raised platforms, and later on, the ziggurats were step pyramids and that gradually get higher and higher, and at the very top, that's where they would put the raised platform temple. So let's fast forward to the early dynastic period after the cataclysmic flood. And here to the right, you have an artist's reconstruction of the city of Ur. And this city, as well as other city-states in Mesopotamia, were built around the raised platform temple. And the surrounding houses were made of mud brick, like the temple. And these mud bricks, they were round and unstable. The Mesopotamians did not have access to the large stones that the ancient Egyptians did. The mud brick was sun-baked and finished in a plaster coating. But it was unstable, like I said, and it needed to be rebuilt over time. So these cities got higher and higher and created these mounds, which we today call tells. And for instance, in the city of Eridu, there was a famous ziggurat of Amar built around 2000 BCE, but underneath it was 18 different mud brick raised platform temples. So the cities got higher and higher as the architects and engineers had to rebuild these mud brick structures. The city, as it developed, would gain a wall around it. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, it talks about how Gilgamesh built a wall around Uruk, and it became more sophisticated and more divided by profession. So priests and living near the temple and craftsmen living farther away. There was a main canal with a harbor that ran through the city, a main street, and later on there are palaces, right? Palaces where the king or Lugals lived, and it became a large socio-economic hub. So in the palace, craftsmen could live, and there were food storehouses, granaries, and shrines even. So this shows the slow development of the hierarchy and the transfer of power from God to men, to the kings. Okay. Outside the temple walls, you could find the reed huts of poor fishermen, like the Arabs from that came up the coast. And also, it's important to mention that there were courtyard houses, that the Mesopotamians developed the courtyard house, so an open courtyard in the middle that couldn't look out into the street. There was only one opening into the street, and all the inner rooms faced into the courtyard to create this kind of convection cooling process. And it was even said that a lot of people slept on their roofs. Finally, I want to look at the extensive canal networks that the ancient Sumerians built. Irrigation agriculture and the collective effort needed to build these canals was really started in Chogamami around 5500 BCE. And this is in the northern part of Mesopotamia. But the Sumerians soon adopted this and perfected this process. And so canals, like I said, ran through the city, and they were more important than roads for transportation. Also, the Mesopotamians started using bitumen, which is a sticky liquid that seeps from crude oil deposits. It's like asphalt, and it was used for caulking the reed boats that they would ride up and down the canals. And bitumen was also used sometimes as a mortar in the mud brick temples. Finally, the shaduf, which was also used in ancient Egypt, was developed and improved in Mesopotamia, and it is this structure here with a long vertical pole and another horizontal pole on top of it, and it created leverage for pulling up water out of the canals in a basket or some type of bag. Probably this bag or pottery was waterproofed too with this bitumen. So in the next episode, we're going to look at some of the trade and commerce of the Sumerians. I hope you enjoyed this episode. See you then.